Today we're going to take a look at another way on how we can graph our linear equations. Yesterday we looked at graphing them using a table, and again, that will always work. But we want to make sure that we have some other tools in our tool bag to be able to graph our linear equations. And another one of those tools is using the intercepts to be able to graph them. And as you move into your 8th grade year, then we're actually going to learn other ways to be able to graph our linear equations as well. So when I talk about an intercept, think about like what the word intercept means. Intercept is something that intersects. So if I were to intercept you for football, I'm kind of like getting in the way of the pass. I'm intersecting the pass. Same thing with math. Intercept means that it's crossing one of our axes. The y-intercept is the y-coordinate of the point where the graph intersects the y-axis. So y-intercept crosses the y-axis. Now, if you just take a moment to think about the coordinate plane. If I were to say this is at the y value of 5, that we would say has an ordered pair of 0, 5, because the x value is 0. That always holds true when you're talking about the y-axis. Any point along here is going to have an x value of 0. So whenever you think about the y-intercept, the x-coordinate is always 0. This is something that we're going to be using here in just a little bit to solve some equations in order for us to graph them. Likewise, the x-intercept is the x-coordinate of the point where the graph intersects the x-axis. Again, this x in the intercept tells you the axis that it crosses. And likewise, if I were to put a point here and tell you that's where x is 9, we'll say, you would again tell me that this ordered pair is 9, 0. Because any point on this line has a y value of 0. So again, when we're looking at an x-coordinate, x-intercept I should say, the y value is always 0. Here's how I tell students to remember this, is that the y-intercept, it's the other value that is 0. So if you're doing the y-intercept, the other letter is always going to be 0. So we're going to be using that here in just a little bit to solve our equations. Before we do that, I want to give you guys just a little bit of practice where you're looking at a graph and you're telling me the x and y coordinates to start with. So again, we're taking a look to see where does the graph cross these x and y axes. If I take a look at the first one here, it's where that red line is crossing the x-axis. And it crosses here. What is that ordered pair? Remember that you run before you fly. So -2, 0. And because the number's in the x-axis, x-coordinate, this is our x-intercept. So that means the one that we find next, this is our y-intercept. And that's going to be where it crosses the y-axis, which is at 0, 1. So here we found our x and y intercept. In a little bit, we're going to be finding those two to make the graph. Let's look at our next one. Here I see a point that crosses an axis. It crosses the x-axis. So that is my x-intercept. And that value just so happens to also be -2, 0. And the y-intercept is our other point on where it crosses an axis, and that is at 0, 3. This last example, I want you guys to go ahead and try that, and then when everyone's done, go ahead and press play and see if you agree with my answer. Okay, looking at this one, you should have found that the x-intercept is 2, 0, and that the y-intercept is 0, 4. I've also highlighted where those intercepts fall. If you have any questions, talk about it and then continue on. All right, so the big point of this lesson, again, is for us to find the x and y intercepts in order for us to graph. So here are the steps on how we do both of them. When we're trying to find the x-intercept, remember we want to have that x value, so we're going to replace the y with 0. That opposite letter needs to turn to a 0. And then we're going to solve for the intercept that we're looking for. Likewise with the y, but this time I'm replacing the x with 0, and we're going to solve for y. Basically, I tell students the intercept you're trying to find, your equation better have that letter in it. And then you solve with what's left over. So let's look at this first example. So we're going to find both the x and y intercepts, and then we're going to graph the equations, graph the equation using the intercepts. So here's what I'm going to do first. I'm just going to draw my workspace in half. I know that I have to find the x-intercept, and we have to find the y-intercept. So let's think about this one first. If we're doing the x-intercept, I have to put in a 0 somewhere. Where are we going to put the 0 in? In for the x or in for the y? Because we're trying to find the x, this is the letter I have to see in the equation. Everything else turns to a 0. So this becomes 5x minus 2 times 0 equals 10. So notice here when we substitute it in for the x-intercept, the x is still in our equation here. And now we solve. Now there's some really cool things that actually happen when you're trying to solve here. If I were to simplify, what is 2 times 0 right here? Hopefully you guys are saying it's 0. You got it. So cross it off. And we're left with 5 equals 10. Most of these are going to end up where it's just a one-step equation for us to solve. And then you're going to ask yourself, what undoes 5 times x? And you're going to say dividing by 5. So x equals 2. Now this is really close to our x-intercept, but intercepts are always listed as a point. So we want to make sure that we write the ordered pair that goes along with that. So now we found our x-intercept. Let's graph it. Now let's find our y-intercept. Again, we're trying to find the y-intercept, so when I write my equation, this letter will be here. Everything else becomes a 0. So 5, oops, I ran into a letter, but I'm making that one be a 0. Minus 2 times y equals 10. So again, taking a look at it, we've gone through, we've replaced all the letters except for y with a 0. And now we'll simplify. Multiply if you can. 5 times 0 is 0, so it crosses out. So we're left with negative 2y equals 10. Again, a one-step equation. Dividing by negative 2, y equals negative 5. And again, I will mark this wrong if you write this for your y-intercept, because that's what the y value is, but an intercept is really a point. So we want to make sure we write that as an ordered pair. And also notice here, I'm going to box that in, that for your ordered pair, whatever you just solved for, that's the position it goes into for that ordered pair. So this was our y, so that goes in the y position of an ordered pair. Likewise for the x, that goes in the x position of the ordered pair. And now we're going to graph that point. And the definition of a line is connecting 2 points. So as long as we have 2 points, we can use a ruler and make a straight line between those 2 points. Now again, mine isn't perfect because I can't put a ruler on here, but you guys can do that on your sheets and on your homework. And I'm going to be expecting you guys to do so, just like we did yesterday. Let's take a look at another example. Again, let's start with by putting the line through the middle of our work and knowing that we have to find our x-intercept and the y-intercept. So to start with, if I'm doing the x-intercept, what letters should I see in our equation? We should see the x, and everything else becomes a 0. And again, when I say everything else, every other letter becomes a 0. So 5 times 0 is 0, so we're going to cross that off. Again, that happens most of the time when you're solving these. So negative 3x equals 30. And again, I don't want to say always, but most of the time you're going to end up dividing for that one-step equation to solve to get that intercept. So my intercept is at negative 10, 0. And again, to review with the graphing, I know that we did a lot of this yesterday. Remember that this is your x-coordinate, so you walk before you fly. So you're going to go back to negative 10. And you don't fly at all. And then let's go ahead and find our y-intercept. Finding the y-intercept means that every other letter besides the y turns into a 0. So negative 3, in x, so that becomes a 0, plus 5y equals 30. See if you can multiply anything. Negative 3 times 0 is a 0, so let's cross them out. So we end up with 5y equals 30. Dividing both sides by 5, we end up with y equals 6. And again, we cannot leave it as just that equation. We have to write it as an ordered pair. And because it was the y-intercept, you put in the 0 first. Graphing this one, we don't walk at all. We get to fly right away. And now we have our 2 points. And connect them with a straight line through those 2 points. Let's take a look at another one. Again, solving. So I need to find the x and y intercept. And this is basically what you're doing on your homework. You're finding those x and y intercepts and graphing them. To start with, the x-intercept. Which value has to be in my equation? The x, whatever intercept you're trying to find, that value, that letter stays, everything else goes to a 0. So you end up with 4x plus 2 times 0 equals 16. Multiply that 0. Again, usually I'll cross out. 4x equals 16. And solving that equation, we end up with x equals 4. This ordered pair students usually don't have any problems with at all for writing that one. But again, the x-coordinate is your first one, so that's why the 4 goes in that first position. And graphing it at 4, 0. Now let's do our y-intercept. Again, you're finding the y-intercepts. So as a result, this letter needs to be in our equation. All other letters become a 0. So 4 times 0 plus 2y equals 16. Cross those out because it equals 0. That's again why we're crossing out. 4 times 0 is 0, so that's why we cross it out. So we're left with 2y equals 16 and dividing it by 2. So we find out that y is equal to 8. So my ordered pair is 0, 8. Graphing that one. Again, we don't move left or right. We don't have to walk at all. We automatically fly up 8 and put that point. And again, connect them with a line. And you'll notice again with my lines that I put arrows at the end of them. The arrows let the reader know that this line does go on for an ever and ever. If you don't put the arrows at the end, it's not a big deal, but technically you're supposed to. All right, on this one, I would like you guys to go ahead and try this one. See if you can work it out. I'm going to give you guys a start that you know that you have to kind of set up this T-chart here where you have your x-intercept and y-intercept. Go ahead and find both of those, graph them, and see what you get. And when everyone's done, or most people are done, go ahead and see if we come up with the same answer. All right, just kind of talking through this one again, x-intercept. When I rewrote the equation, the x stayed, every other letter became a 0. Working through the solving, we end up with x equals 3. So our ordered pair is 3, 0. Likewise with our y-intercept, we're trying to find our y-intercept, so y needs to stay in the equation. All the other letters become a 0. Working through the solving, you end up with y equals 2. So here's your ordered pair of 0, 2, and here's our line from there. If you guys have questions, talk about it. See if you can help each other out. Otherwise, I would like you guys to go ahead and try this example next. And we'll do the same thing that we did with the last one. So taking a look at this one, again, we're finding the x-intercept first. And I will tell you guys, it does not matter if you find the x-intercept or the y-intercept first. I just kind of do things in order. And to me, order is alphabetical. So that's why I always do x and then y. But if you did the y-intercept first, that's perfectly fine. The order doesn't matter as long as you plug in correctly. So I did the x-intercept first. So again, I'm plugging in 0 for the letter that's not an x. Going through with our solving, and you end up with x equals 7. So our ordered pair is 7, 0. And you can see I have that graphed over here. Then we're doing the y-intercept. So again, if you're doing the y-intercept, the y stays in the equation. The other letters become a 0. Going through your solving, you end up with y equals negative 3. So your ordered pair is 0, negative 3. And graphing that one, your graph for this equation looks like this. If you guys have questions, again, help each other out. See if you can help answer each other's questions with it. Our last example that we're going to take a look at, these are going to be the types of equations that you're going to see most often at the start of 8th grade, because we're going to be learning how to graph these in another way. This one's actually called slope-intercept form, and that's going to be something that we learn next year. But our process on how we graph them with finding the x and y intercepts is exactly the same. But with the solving, this sometimes tricks a few students with the solving for one of these intercepts, so we'll talk about that. So here we're trying to find the x-intercept. So the x stays, everything else becomes a 0. So that means we have 0 equals negative x plus 4. Now this is the first instance when we put in a 0, and this is the only thing on that left-hand side. So in this case, this 0 has to stay. And now this is an equation that we actually need 2 steps to be able to solve. So this might help you guys out with a line through the middle. Remember, we want to get that x so it's by itself. So we undo the constant, the number without the letter first. So minusing that 4. And then this negative x, remember that there's really a hidden 1 there because mathematicians got lazy. So we divide it by negative 1 to get rid of that. So we end up with our x coordinate to be 4. So our ordered pair is 4, 0. That is the hard one on here for students to find. They have a lot of difficulty with this 0 being the only thing on that left-hand side, and then some difficulty going through and doing this 2-step equation solving. So just be careful with that. There's only maybe one like that on the homework if I remember correctly. Now let's go ahead and find the y-intercept. Y-intercept for these ones are super easy. Y stays. Everything else that's not y becomes a 0. So now all I have are some numbers on this side. So let's go ahead and figure out what is negative 0 plus 4. Hopefully you guys are telling me it's 4. So our ordered pair for the y-intercept is 0, 4. So our graph will look something like this. Again, yours will look nicer because you have a ruler, and I don't. Now, a couple comments that I want to say. One, these two both ended up having, like, the coordinate was a 4. It will not always be that way with these types. Just happened to be this one for a problem that I ended up picking. Also, look back at your notes. Notice that for every single equation, we always had 2 intercepts. Notice that we never combined those 2 numbers together. We always have 2 separate ordered pairs. So when you guys are solving, every single one of them, you should have 2 separate ordered pairs for both of them. If you guys still have questions on this one, see if you guys can help each other out. And then when you're ready, your homework is the 8.3 Day 2 worksheet. Again, you are finding intercepts through the whole worksheet and then graphing each intercept to make the line then. Good luck, and I will see you guys tomorrow.